want to say, in the interest of full disclosure, that Sandra, I used Sandra's services for some pretty debilitating anxiety that I had, and I had the most incredible experience. And you know, that was a while ago. I won't date myself and tell you how long, but it was a while ago, and I never forgot her. And I'm so thrilled she can join us for PowerSkills. Welcome to all of you. Welcome back, and we're happy to begin this. And Sandra, welcome to you. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Rosalia. I'm so honored, and you made me feel like a rock star. You're so nice. My God. Thank you. I'm not sure I'm deserving of all that, but I sure enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and so lovely to see you again.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to go back to some of the questions we had in the first session, but everyone, please feel free to go ahead and put some of your questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we could. So thanks for that. Actually, I want to start with something first. I really enjoyed your book, and I love the title of it, especially because, you know, we've all read fairy tales and we've always got the same, you know, so the woman meets the Prince Charming and then off they go and life is beautiful. So I love your title. No, the person becomes a happy and empowered woman. Will you be writing another book?
Oh my God. It's so funny. Writing that book almost killed me. I'll be honest. I don't think so. I found it's not the writing of the book, it's the editing of the book was very tough. But, you know, I really feel that that book was written as like a labor of love, because the book really talks about the dangers of caretaking, for those of you who were there for the earlier lecture. And the truth is that of course is something that I fell into. And so I felt me and my partner in that's the Empowered Woman Company, felt there was something that we had learned that we wanted to share. So we did do it. We're really happy we did it, but Rosalia, it's a big job to write a book. So I'm going to stick with the speaking engagements for now and treating clients. Okay, that sounds good. Too bad. I was looking forward to it, but I'll just listen to your radio shows. Okay, sounds good. Wonderful. I was actually curious, Sandra, too. How was your interest sparked in this area in the first place? So what led you down this road career-wise? That's such a good question. You know, it's funny that it seemed like it happened serendipitously. So I was, you know, I actually worked in a bar. I took a job in a bar when I was a very young girl. And it was a long time ago, I hate to say. And I thought it would be a part-time job while I went to school, and that would be the end of it. And as fate intervened, I ended up working in a bar for 22 years of my life. I mean, really take that in, 22 years. That's a lot of years. And so I, first of all, attribute my real psychology education to working in a bar, because I learned more in those 22 years than I even did at school. So that got me, and people would come see me and ask questions about things in their lives. And I found myself in a position, you know, like a typical bartender giving advice. And eventually I realized that I wanted to go back to school and study psychology. So that's step one, how I got into it. And the other part is things sort of fell into, one thing led to another, and I ended up in the field of cognitive behavioral therapy and anxiety treatment. It feels like it just happened. The truth is that there is some, I have a sister who has suffered with anxiety her whole life. And so I don't know if unconsciously that played a role, but it seems interesting that I ended up in the field of anxiety when I was well aware of the fact of how much she suffered. The road just opened, and I also really, for me, if I were to go see a psychologist or a psychotherapist, I really would want a scientific approach. And the treatment for anxiety and depression and these kinds of things is a very scientific approach and a very directive approach. And that really appealed to me. I lean towards being a no-nonsense kind of person and saying it as it is. And in other kinds of therapy, you're supposed to just listen and empathize. Not really my style. I'm definitely empathetic, but I have a few things to say. So that's how it happens. Which is wonderful, because in the session we had earlier today, there were people in the chat who said they appreciated your candor, not so many words, or your straight talk, as is the name of your radio program. Yeah. So I think that's very much appreciated. And certainly one thing that I like, and let me know if this is your intentional approach, but you normalize what could be very scary for people. So the first time someone has a panic attack or feels anxiety might be very frightening, but also makes them feel inferior. And you explain why it happens and that it's normal. And that I think that's the first step in making people perhaps feel comfortable to face it. Is that your intentional approach, to explain the reason why you feel the way you feel and the way your body's reacting? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very insightful question against Rosalia. Why am I not surprised? I think that's really, really smart because um, it is very much my intention. I feel that when people come into my office and come into the clinic, they do feel like they've done something wrong or their bodies have let them down. There is shame. And I really feel bad about that. I want to take the shame out. I think that we're all in this together. I think it's difficult. Life is difficult. Life has challenges. And I think we can all fall into the pit. So number one, I want to normalize it. Number two, anxiety is so incredibly prevalent and people don't talk about it. So they think they're the only one suffering. And number three, what I said in the workshop is really true. Anxiety comes from an adaptation that was really helpful. So when I say you're the descendant of very adaptive people, I think it's good news to find out that your body's not letting you down. It's getting a false alarm, but it's not letting you down. And I guess I don't like what we call pathologizing people and making them feel like something is terribly wrong with them. I really don't feel that way about the people I work with. I always say my real secret to my success is I had a lot of the problems that people have had, and I had to work through them like anyone else. And I think that when I hire therapists, if I ask them if they've had any difficulties in their life and they say no, I'm moving on to the next interview. I'm not interested.
Yeah, and I understand that. I wouldn't see a therapist who has no concept of what it is to feel like of what I'm feeling. So I love that you actually asked that question.
Well, for sure.
You said something in the workshop this morning that I found interesting. You said that if you don't express your anger, this leads to or can lead to anxiety. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, again, a really important point that you're picking out there, because repressed anger is a huge, huge issue for people, especially women, because I think as women, we can all agree that we're not socialized to be comfortable with anger. And when anger gets stuck in the body, when any emotion gets stuck in the body, emotions are energy. So it's going to transmute. Something has to happen to it. So if it's not being expressed, it's going to turn into something. For some people, that's anxiety. For some people, it's depression. For some people, it's disease. So anger is an interesting one because it works on the same system in the body. It works on your sympathetic nervous system. If you really get angry, your sympathetic nervous system fires, fight or flight. So if we're not in touch with our anger, what's happening to that emotion? It's going to seep out somehow. So which way is that going to turn out? So if I start to feel very stressed or anxious, I'm usually curious if something's happened, a boundary violation perhaps that I haven't dealt with. You know, when somebody violates our boundaries, we feel something in our stomach like, oh, like that didn't feel good. If it's not being expressed, it's getting stuck inside of you. Often shows up as anxiety or depression.
That's so interesting because I think a lot of people pride themselves on saying, well, I'm a person who never gets angry. And I've done that in the past and with this like, well, that's chip on my shoulder. I don't get angry. I'm very calm. But yes, I love that you say it goes somewhere because of course we all have emotions and it goes somewhere. So I really, that really struck a chord with me this morning. I'm going to go to some questions in the chat now.
Well, Leah, before you do that, I just want to say one thing on what you just said is I want you all to remember that when a baby comes out of his or her mother's stomach, what is the baby doing? What's the first thing the baby does? The baby crying and screaming. You're supposed to have emotions. So when we say I don't have anger, it's because we've learned not to have emotions. It's not natural. You start your life with those. It's the first thing that happens is crying, screaming, protesting. You're supposed to have your emotions. So I just couldn't resist adding that on to what you just said. Is so when we say things like I don't get angry, listen, it's good to have good emotional regulation. So a better sentence might be, I can handle my anger well. I know how to express myself well. But you're entitled to get angry when someone cuts you off in traffic. It's normal to get angry or whatever, you know, or a pandemic, just saying.
Yes, or definitely a pandemic. I think we've almost had a year of that. So I'm sure we've all expressed emotions at that. Sure. So I'm going to take a question from Everett in the chat. Post having children, I've been quick to anger and I feel that's because I'm anxious all the time. I'm functioning, but not at a level that I should be. What are some practical tips or things that I can do every day that I can do to reduce my anxiety?
Okay, well, so this is a good question, and I am going to answer a bit based on my workshop today, so I'm not sure if this person was there or not. But the first thing that has to be done is self-care. And what does self-care entail? So the very first thing that we have to talk about is food, sleep, exercise. I mentioned it earlier. It sounds really simple and basic. It's actually really hugely important. I really don't think I'd be doing okay during this pandemic. I was mentioning to Rosalia, my kids are at home, my husband's at home, I'm at home. If I'm not doing my food, sleep, exercise, I'm not going to be feeling well. So what does that mean? I need to be eating regular meals throughout the day, snacking, healthy snacks. I need to be getting a proper amount of sleep, and I absolutely need to be moving my body. I'd go one step further, moving your body, and some of that has to be done outside. That's very basic. So when we start to get impatient with our kids, and God knows it happens to me, it means that where our pockets are empty. We're not taking care of ourselves. So self-care has to go at the top of the list. Oxygen masks on the airplane, you first. If you take care of yourself, do your meditation, do your breathing, do your exercise, go for a walk. I go for a walk in the morning, no matter what the weather is. Make sure you get that stuff in. Then it's much easier to be there for your kids. You have to start with yourself first. Food, sleep, exercise is number one. And exercise, we all have excuses for exercise. We got to do it. We got to move our bodies. Very important. Not negotiable.
Did that help ever? So just let me know in the chat if that answered your question, but thank you, Sandra, for that. And if anybody wants to have a question and would rather ask it themselves, feel free to put up your hand. And well, you know, your virtual hand, and Deanna will let me know that you have a question. We have another question here from Paulina. I've always lived with anxiety, but recently came to identify with the symptoms of ADHD as well. Any tips for dealing with anxiety and ADHD? I always feel constantly overwhelmed and unable to focus. I have so many overdue things on my to-do list that feed into my anxiety, but I'm paralyzed by indecision and can't prioritize, even if I think I know what needs to be done first. I often lack the mental energy to get them done.
Okay, well, I do have an answer, but I have a disclaimer first, which is I am not an expert in ADHD. I'm an expert in anxiety. So when someone calls a clinic with ADHD, we will always say to them, we'll treat the anxiety. I know enough about it to understand how that must play into this. So my answers are as follows. Part of the problem when we get overwhelmed is it's a bit like cleaning a very messy house. We try to clean the whole house and it feels paralyzing. So then we just want to quit. So you want to break things down into small pieces. Now, if you're a good perfectionist, and I certainly am, small pieces don't sound attractive. So if I say I'm going to clean my room for 10 minutes, it feels like that's not good enough. The truth is that if I really just keep to the 10 minutes and then go do something pleasurable, then I will be likely to go back to doing it over and over again. So we want to break it down into small pieces. Another thing that I think is very helpful for people to remember, and it's a game changer, and it's not me saying this, it's someone way more brilliant than me, is that people think that motivation comes before action. I think one of the most brilliant things we can learn is action comes before motivation. So if we're waiting for motivation, we're never going to do the things that we sort of dread. So the way to get motivation is you take an action towards it. So if, let's say, I haven't exercised in months and I want to start exercising, I have to say, okay, Sandra, we're going to do 5 minutes on the treadmill. Okay, and now the perfectionist in me will go, 5 minutes, that's not nearly enough. Okay, or if I get distracted easily, let's say, ADHD or whatever kicks in, again, you have to come back to just 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a victory, and you build upon it. So as I said, I'm not an expert in ADHD, but the concept of getting distracted will exaggerate if you're feeling overwhelmed. So if you can say to yourself, I'm going to do a small task for 10 minutes, I'm going to take a break and then do another task for 10 minutes, you're more likely to succeed. And here's what happens. As you start succeeding, you start feeling good. You start ticking things off. The only problem, the mind trick, is that you're likely to say to yourself, it's not good enough to do 10 minutes. That's the part you have to be careful about. Yes, it is, because 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, it all adds up. And when we're starting from not doing anything at all to doing 10 minutes, that's a huge victory. So break down your tasks and make them all victories, and you'll see you'll get more done. And remember, action comes before motivation. Stop waiting for motivation. Take the action first.
I love that, because I actually literally wait for motivation. And of course, that doesn't just come intrinsic, right? That's not, it's not one day. If you haven't exercised in 1 month, you're not going to wake up the next morning and be like, oh yeah, I'm really motivated to go run 10 kilometers this morning.
At all. I'm telling you, Rosalia, that 5 minute thing, when I've stopped exercising, that's the deal. Okay, I'll do it for 5 minutes. And then after 5 minutes, if you're into it, you stay longer. But the thing is, it's a victory even at 5 minutes. And then the next day you go to 10 minutes. So you just go one step at a time. But again, not waiting for motivation. I think people, Rosalia, you're not alone. People wait and wait and wait for motivation. It really is the Nike commercial. Just do it. Forget about motivation. Motivation comes from action.
I think that's a gem for everyone. And you can use your reaction and thumbs up if you've had that idea that even with something like exercise, oh, well, 5 minutes, well, what's, I'm not going to bother. What's 5 minutes going to do? So we have some thumbs up and clap. So yeah, I think that certainly resonates with me, and it obviously resonates with other people here as well. So, and somebody says, I also believe in doing a little bit at a time, action before motivation all the way. And I never thought of it that way. I was really thought, why are some people just so self-motivated? But I guess they do the action part first. So that's really interesting. So this morning, or in the session before this afternoon, somebody asked about how do you know the signs of anxiety in children? And you talked about some of those things, but I have a bit of a related question. If you know somebody who has debilitating anxiety or some form of anxiety, and you were saying it's important that you don't become the caretaker, but how might you suggest that they need help, for example, without insulting them or perhaps causing some kind of issue in whatever relationship is, but just suggesting that, maybe your anxiety needs some professional looking after?
Well, I really think it depends who we're talking about here. Are we talking about a child, a spouse, a friend? So I'll try to cover the gamut, but first of all, when people are drowning, they're reaching for someone. And the thing is, if you're rescuing them, they're never going to therapy because they have a therapist that's called you. And so the first step is to not get into that kind of relationship because that's problematic, and they're not going to get help because they're going to keep leaning on you, and then you're going to end up becoming possibly sick yourself or resentful at the minimum. So part of it is not getting out of the rescuer role, and then saying that's, something like if you're talking to a friend or a spouse or whatever, someone who's of your age, to say, it sounds really rough. And, I know someone who's gone, I know there's people who are experts in this, and maybe this is something that could be helpful for you. You could try it. Now, the thing is that when someone's suffering from anxiety, if their response to that is no, like, no way am I doing that, chances are they don't want to get better right now, unless they have a real allergy to therapy. And therapy is not the only way. There's self-help books, people turn to religion, whatever. But again, if the person has, I talked about this in the lecture, if you keep getting yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, the person is getting a secondary gain from being anxious. So how could there be secondary gains? Well, let's say you're so anxious that you don't drive a car and people keep coming to pick you up. Well, that's a secondary gain. So there's nothing in your interest to get better. So that's with a compadre, like someone, like a husband or someone your age or a friend. You gently can suggest that this could be an option. You've heard good things and can help them, but you don't push it, because if we're pushing it, we're trying to control again, and that's not going to work. But we must get out of the role of rescuing them. You see, that's the thing about anxious people want to get rescued. Even as a therapist, when my clients say you changed my life, I say you changed your life. I gave some good tips, but you changed your life. We're not rescuers, okay? People rescue themselves. Now, if it's a child, that's a different story. That is, like, again, an issue of boundaries, because if the anxiety is starting to interfere, and that's the big question. I mean, we all have a bit of anxiety, especially now. But if the anxiety is starting to interfere in your day-to-day life, that's a problem. So that it might even apply to a spouse. If my spouse is very anxious or depressed, it's not only that I might take a different approach to them, because I might be like, this might be a good idea. Let's say he says, no, I'm not interested. If it's starting to impact our family, and I do want you guys to realize that when somebody has anxiety or depression, it affects the entire family. So at that point, that would be a boundary for me. I'd be like, listen, I understand you don't want to get help, but this is affecting our family and I'm not okay with it. So either, we're going to get you an appointment, or we're going to make a couple therapy appointment, because I need to talk about how this is a problem. I would take that very seriously, because the strongest emotion in the house runs the house. And if my husband would be suffering from anxiety or depression, that is going to impact my children. Same applies with my children. If they are anxious, they're not going to want to go to therapy. I get that. And as I said in my earlier talk, most likely with children, the parents are the ones who need to go in anyways to get some good tips on boundaries and consequences. But I would not be in any way indulging the anxiety. What does that mean? Avoidance is not going to be in any way tolerated. So let's say they don't want to do something, they want to avoid it. okay, I'm not a mean person. I'm going to be nice about it. I'm going to say, but we have to get you there. If you're afraid to speak in the class, okay, but we're going to take steps towards getting you there. If they're not willing to do that, then we need to bring in a professional to help, because part of the antidote of anxiety is for sure having structure. So if we give into it, we're actually causing another problem and feeding avoidance. Avoidance equals anxiety.
And it's interesting that you said about the car, because actually that was something I had an issue with for a long time, is not being able to drive over bridges. And it was interesting because I think it's a good, what you gave as a tip is to maybe examine for people who are stuck somewhere and don't feel like they're in the place where they can help themselves, to reflect on what it is that they're gaining by not helping themselves. I love that, because not only do you see that in people, but maybe for yourselves, for ourselves, if we're resistant to some kind of change that should be positive, like what is it that's keeping us from wanting to seek that? So yeah. I think that's great.
It's a hard question to ask ourselves, but it's a very important one.
Absolutely. I could see how that, yeah, there are gains. And I remember someone told me that once, like, well, you're obviously getting something out of not help yourself. And I thought, well, who would want to be miserable? But obviously there are hidden gains there. And I don't know, I have so many questions to ask. I don't know where to start, but I'll go with this one. In the first session this morning, you mentioned that you don't take on some patients. So you would actually refuse some patients, if I understood correctly. Can you tell me in what cases you refuse a patient and why?
Well, the example I gave this morning, I mean, it's very rare I refuse a patient. I'm not sure I would, globally say that, but no. the example I gave was a woman who called me many years ago who said, I'm very depressed and I want you to treat me, but I'm just telling you, I don't eat and I don't want to discuss it. I'm not going to eat. I would feel guilty taking on that patient because I'm taking money. There's money involved in the therapy, and there's no way I'm going to be able to help her, because that comes back to my food, sleep, exercise. If you're not eating, you're prone to anxiety and depression. So to me, it feels like I'd be stealing money. So there's the ethical part. And then on a personal level, you called me no nonsense. I really like my clients to get better. And that's the drug for me is that. So if I'm working with a client and they're not doing anything to get themselves better, they've fallen into victim. So I will talk with them about falling into victim. As I said, we all fall into victim, all of us. There's no exception to the rule. And I totally accept having the occasional pity party. I like an occasional pity party myself. But if you're really not trying to get better, I think therapy is, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. And I also think a little bit, I would call it a psychological word, but it's a collusion for me to keep working with someone who clearly doesn't want to get better. So would I kick them out of my office? I refuse to see you? No, but I think that people see very quickly in working with me that we're on a path for healing and reaching for the stars, which is not easy, but it's definitely doable. And if you choose in life not to get better, I respect that. It's just I'm not a magician. I can't make you get better. It's a collaborative relationship. So that's the kind of client that, yeah, like that woman, that example from so many years ago that she didn't want to eat. It's her right not to want to eat, but I can't treat her anxiety.
I mean, I just love that. I shouldn't have used the word refuse, and I didn't mean it that, but I think that's so interesting, that what's the point? And if someone's not going to put in the work, and you mentioned that this morning, well, there's not really anything you can do if they're not willing to do their part. So I think it's wonderful that you say that and don't take them on as patients, or I imagine don't continue with patients who don't do.
Yeah, I tell them, take a break. Just take a break. You're not ready right now. And sometimes when they take a break, they come back and realize what was the blockage. I had a client years ago who, was struggling with an eating disorder and it wasn't moving. And I said, look, we got to take a break. And she came back and said, you know what, I'll be honest, my parents were paying for the therapy and I really blame them for this eating disorder. So I didn't want to get better. So, sometimes it's a friendly break. It's not meant meanly. And, we want people to take step after step towards, moving up the ladder to feel better. And that's very exciting. And the potential is enormous for all of us and it never ends. It doesn't end for me either. You just want to keep going up the ladder.
And I guess that sometimes timing is a question of timing, right? You may not be in the place to be helped, right? And I guess that either time or doing something else and then coming back, as you say, because that's, I could see that being an issue where some people they're just not ready for that at that time.
That's it. That's it. It is about timing. And I think that, we have to respect that. We have to respect when people are ready, and when they're ready to do it, they'll do it. And here's another tip on that is people are ready when the pain gets greater than the secondary gain. So, no one shows up in my office when they're feeling great. They show up in my office when the pain becomes insurmountable. And that's the motivation for change. If it stops working for you, you're going to want to change. If it's working for you, you're not going to want to change.
I love that. When the pain is greater than the secondary gain. I mean, that makes sense. I love that. I have another question here in the chat. How do you recognize, and I think this is a great question that we probably have all slipped into this, but how do you recognize when you slip from being a listening ear or to trying to save somebody and then enabling their anxiety?
Well, are we talking about a non-professional, like a friend?
Nicole, is that whether you want to write it or just say it out loud? Are you talking about a friend, or what's the relationship? Yes, she says, a friend.
Okay, well, this is a very tricky business. And as I said in the earlier talk, I'm a recovering caretaker because of course I want to save my friends and family members, but we really can't do that. The relationship becomes dysfunctional. So, I can't save a friend or a family member from their anxiety. I can be supportive, I can be empathetic, but it doesn't fall under the mandate of friendship. It needs a professional. And one of the reasons it needs a professional is that there's professional boundaries, and it becomes clear what belongs to the therapist, what belongs to the client. Whereas with a friend, it starts to get really murky. And eventually what starts to happen is, in most cases, is the person who's trying to save the other, instead of being appreciated, ends up getting themselves into trouble. The friend ends up blaming them. And also the friend who tries to save the other ends up often burnt out, and possibly with what we call compassion fatigue, which is a real phenomena in taking care of people, where you're exhausted and you can end up in burnout and with your own anxiety. So it really doesn't work. So we can't do that. So we have to really maintain professional boundaries, which means a professional has to be helping someone with these things. And a friend is more someone who's saying, like, that sounds really rough. Like, what are you thinking about doing about that? So you have to not take the hook, because you see, of course, if someone's anxious, they can fall into victimization, and a victim knows exactly what to say. It's an unconscious mechanism to hook you. Like to say things like, you'll never believe what happened to me. It was this horrible thing happened to me. And then that's the hook where you go, what happened? And then you're in, and they start to put it all on you. And you're like, well, why don't you do this? And the next thing you know, you hang up the phone and you feel terrible. And you're like, what just happened? And I know people are nodding. It happens to people all the time, because that's a dance. That's not healing. That's not healing at all. We're in dysfunction, and no one's getting better. The person giving the advice is not getting better, and the person who's hooking you is not getting better. They're actually falling more into victim. And remember, during my talk, a victim needs a perpetrator. So you're going to be it. The rescuer is going to eventually become the perpetrator.
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I'm sure a lot of people have experienced, that kind of relationship or situation. We're out of time, Sandra. Would you have time for one more question? I can't believe we're out of time already.
Rosalie, I did say I could stay for 45 minutes today.
Oh,
so good news is Emily and I had agreed on 45 minutes. I am still okay. So I'm happy to answer any more questions. If you guys have to, Emily's giving me the thumbs up. If you guys have the time, I'm happy to answer. I'll keep
okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your extra time.
I would really prefer to answer everyone's questions, since I'm not going to be here after this. So if people have questions, bring it on. Let's do it.
We're going to call you every day, Sandra.
That I can't do.
We won't. I promise. I have a question actually about the pandemic and the situation now. As we talked about, this has been months that this is going on. Do you have any special or particular, tips that are particular to this situation that we've all been experiencing for so long?
It's going to sound a little repetitive, but I'm telling you right now, your rituals and your traditions and your structure in the house is more important than ever. What's your plan in a given day? I'm working with couples all the time, and I'm hearing that they're taking care of their kids, but they're not taking time to sit down and have a coffee together. You need connection with your couple. You're not just a mother, or a father, you're also a wife and a husband, and you're also an individual. So you need to be strategizing for all those things. You need to make sure that exercise is going in. You need to make sure you're getting outside. You need to make sure you're putting some fun in your life. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. It's a heavy period. So we're all only as good as our strategies. And that's true for everybody, including me. And so what are your stress management strategies? Do you do a breathing exercise? Do you do meditation? Do you do yoga? if you don't have any stress management strategies in place, even without a pandemic, you're very susceptible. And with a pandemic, you know, some days we get a lot of bad news. You know, we all do. We turn on the news. It's not good news. I have to say, without our strategies in the household, I don't think I'd be making it. And so we have our, you know, coffee in the garage. My husband and I go have coffee in the garage to get away from the kids for a few minutes and catch up a little bit. And we play like Uno at night, like silly things, but just things that just keep a structure going and a strategy to release all the heaviness. Another thing on the heaviness, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was watching the news every day. Yeah, that stopped. You have to be careful about how much you're taking in of this. It's pretty heavy stuff, and it has an effect on you. So you want to take in, but not overdo.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that next. In fact, should, you know, if somebody's really feeling anxiety and that is specific to the situation, should they not watch the news? I know you just said now you take it in, but in morsels. But what if you're really anxious about the situation? Should you just avoid? And I know avoid is not a word we want to use in this area, but is it something you just shouldn't do on a regular basis to help you? Or
well, this is a different use of the word avoidance. This is not like, we're not avoiding the subway because we're afraid we're going to have a panic attack.
Yes.
What we're doing is we're making an active choice that the news is not set up to tell you good news. And there's an infusion of negativity coming into your body. So I think it's a choice. And I think that, yeah, I do think it has to be very, very limited. I know for myself, obviously, to be a therapist, I'm a sensitive soul, and I can't take much of it. So I don't believe in putting a bag over your head. I want to know what's going on in the world, but I definitely very much limit it. I know there's people who love to listen to the news, but it's going to have an impact on you. And then there's all these people who are starting to get into conspiracy theories and stuff. This is sometimes a distraction from your own pain. And another thing we have to always remember is to come back to your emotions. Journaling. How are you feeling? What's going on for you? Are you sad? Are you angry? It's okay to feel those emotions. They need to be addressed, though. So even journaling at night, how you're feeling, can be very, very helpful.
And I've certainly been talking to a lot of people, and I'll include myself in this, who've had a lot of nightmares since the pandemic started. Obviously, I mean, there's a lot of other things that have been going on as well, you know, politics and all kinds of things. Do you have any specific suggestions for how you might relax, particularly before going to bed? Or maybe, I know you can't avoid dreaming, of course, but is there something you can do to help in that way?
Well, I think that bedtime is another discussion. It's a big one, but sleep hygiene is something to consider. That's another thing I should have mentioned is, you know, we have anxiety videos. We have videos that people can purchase and learn some of these strategies, but we're not the only game in town. So I'm not saying you have to buy our anxiety videos, but learning about, like, we have one on sleep, for example. So sleep, there's things that you have to learn about sleep hygiene, things that need to be done before you go to sleep. You're not doing vigorous exercise, maybe taking a warm bath, doing something light. If you're on the computer, there's special glasses that you can use. I use them. Again, I'm a sensitive soul. I'm affected by everything. So you want to have really good habits if you want to have a good night's sleep, and you want to keep the bedroom as a safe haven. So again, watching the news in the bedroom, maybe not such a great idea. So what are we doing to set you up for success? So slowly but surely to go to bed in a very relaxed way is going to produce good sleep.
Thank you. And another question that came out here is Marina was asking about your thoughts on shame. That was her question just in general. And I was just wondering if you, what your thoughts on shame, maybe if you know the work of Brene Brown and how as I'm sure you do, and if you have any thoughts on shame and how it affects us.
Well, I think it paralyzes us. I mean, Brene Brown says it better than I ever can, but I think it really paralyzes us. So, and that's a little bit how we started, a little bit talking about normalizing and being, that's another thing during this pandemic. We need to be gentler with ourselves and be kind to ourselves. All the questions relate to this. If you want to get something done and 10 minutes isn't good enough, then you're shaming yourself. So we want to do things with kindness and validation and like, okay, I did a good job today. Did I get everything done? No, but I did a good job. I went for my morning walk. Great. So when we're shaming ourselves, we're in our critical voice and we're saying it's not good enough, and shame becomes very paralyzing. And so it's difficult, but we have to learn the opposite of shame is compassion. So can you have compassion for yourself? It's something I talk about with all my clients, compassion for yourself, compassion for others. It's a skill, it's a muscle we can develop. We can feel compassionate for almost anything. It doesn't mean we have to accept almost anything, but I can understand if somebody's doing something that I really don't agree with, I can understand why they do it and not feel so triggered by it. The truth is, the more I'm judging other people, the more I'm judging myself. And judgment and shame have a very close relationship. So again, compassion, kindness, unconditional positive regard.
We have an interesting comment from Rosina, who happens to be my sister again, in the interest of full disclosure, but she says her anxieties actually disappeared during the pandemic, and now she's made the connection with what you're saying, and she thinks it's perhaps that she's taking care of herself, and she's putting herself first, and that maybe has actually helped in this regard.
Yeah, Rosina, great job. I mean, if you're taking care of yourself, that's probably why. But now you're going to have to, when this pandemic is over, God willing, you have to keep those habits. We still have to do self-care. We're all only as good as our self-care strategies.
And we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask the members of the CATS team, is there a question you want to ask, this being the last one? And if there's something you've been, Deanne, I see you've unmuted yourself, so please go ahead. Oh, wonderful. Oh, someone speak.
And if someone wants to.
Oh, okay. Anybody have a question?
There's some questions here that haven't been answered that I could take if you want.
Sure, yes.
Well, okay, first of all, I just had a quick look. It says, someone's asking if there's going to be a replay of the early morning workshop. And from what I understand, there will be next week. Is that right, on YouTube?
Yeah, we will post all of these on YouTube. And for anybody who's been in any session, you'll get an email with all that information. But all our videos will definitely be on YouTube, even the ones that weren't broadcast on Facebook.
And then someone was asking about, speaking about the martyr aspect, which I wasn't able to finish this morning. Yes. So that's, again, the idea of martyr is self-sacrificing, and self-sacrificing is not a good strategy. And the reason people do it is they end up unconsciously feeling important. Like, you know, I'm a self-sacrificer. It makes me a really good person. Like, it must be nice for you to go on vacation. I can't go on vacation. But the thing is, as I like to say, I've never met a happy martyr in my life. Martyrs are definitely tend to be bitter. And it's not serving a good function. It's not helping you. It's not helping the people around you. As a matter of fact, with kids, even with those couples I talked about who don't take time for the couple, what are they teaching their kids about marriage? If you're a mother who's martyring herself, what are you teaching your kids about happiness? That they're not allowed to have happiness. So when you do self-care, you teach your kids to have the ability to be allowed to be happy too. So that's extremely important. Then very quickly, someone asked about, can you seek help on behalf of your kids? First of all, yes. And second of all, yes, we do meet with the parents almost in every case. You know, if the kid is 18, this person's asking 18, then the 18-year-old might want to come in. But if they don't want to come in, we meet with the parents, and we definitely talk about boundaries and consequences, because boundaries and consequences are at the root of what's going on in a household. If there's no boundaries and consequences, it's very, very likely that there's going to be a lot of anxiety in the house. So it's another thing we didn't talk that much about today, unfortunately, but I'm just closing this up. But boundaries, you know, even though our kids don't want boundaries, our kids need boundaries. I gave the example very briefly today. I'm going to mention it again. I'm still okay on the time, Rosalia, so we're good. I know you're nervous for me. I'm okay. The example that I gave earlier is the policeman. So if there were no police on the street, how would you feel? I mean, you'd be happy to not get tickets, but you'd feel nervous because the world would become chaotic. Well, children are the same. They need tickets. We all need tickets. I mean, why don't we do our full stops? We don't do our full stops because we're boundary violators. And then we get a ticket, and for a few weeks we do our full stop, and then we go back to not doing our full stop. So we need to get another ticket. So it's the same thing. It's true for our kids. It's true for our spouses. It's true for ourselves. There are consequences for our choice. So when we don't put consequences for our choices on ourselves and others, then the world becomes chaotic and anxiety will rule.
Thank you. And I put your link to your website on in the chat. So it's there for, but we actually have somebody asking to repeat the name of your show. So can you tell us a little bit about where people can find you aside from your website, where they can hear you and see you?
Okay, so there's many places. There's a lot going on. So just to review, so the clinic is, you can call us 514-777-4530. And our website is helpforanxietydepression.com. The anxiety videos can be found on anxiety-videos.com. Those are really good for doing anxiety treatment at home, because sometimes people don't want to don't want to come in even before the pandemic, and that's a cheap and easy way to, it's me and another therapist walking you right through how to treat anxiety. We have a parenting one, we have boundaries and consequences. Someone was asking about the radio show. So the radio show, my show was called Straight Talk with Sandra Reich. It's still available 100% online. You can go to, if you punch in straight, well, there's two ways to get it. I guess the fastest way would be go on Voice America website, Straight Talk with Sandra Reich, or if that's too hard to remember, there's a website that says straighttalksandra.com. 3 years worth of radio shows on 100% free on everything from anxiety, caretaking, boundaries, nutrition, you name it. Someone earlier asked if someone is not eating properly, do I refer them to a nutritionist? Of course, 100%. The story with the woman who wasn't eating, she wasn't wanting to learn how to eat properly. She wanted to not eat. What else? There's a few other things that I need to mention. So the radio, oh yes, and also I'm on the last Monday of every month, I'm on something called the Therapist Panel on CJAD at 10 o'clock on the Dr. Lori Betito show. And she's usually talking about, these days we're talking about the pandemic and things that are going on. So lots of ways to stay in touch with me, and I'd be happy to be in touch with anyone. And you know, again, I do feel my God, Emily is unbelievable. She already put the link up for the radio show. How did she, Diana did it too. Oh my God, you have a great team here.
They're mind readers. I tell you, I'm not even finished a word and it's done.
Unbelievable. And the book, oh yeah, someone's asking about the book. So the book is called Once Upon a Time, How Cinderella Grew Up and Became a Happy, Empowered Woman. You can contact us to get the book, or you can get it on Amazon. Either place is fine. Yeah, so those are the ways to be in touch with me. Someone was just saying anxiety is very contagious. 100%, very contagious. Be careful about those smoky rooms. If you're around someone anxious, you have to limit exposure. There's only so much you can take before you're going to get anxiety.
And I don't think I've heard that before, so that's really interesting. I think that's something good to end on, especially now. I'm sure we're all around people who are very anxious, so protecting ourselves is also important. Sandra, I cannot thank you enough on behalf of the CATS team and PowerSkills. It was a true delight, and I know you helped a lot of people. I'm sure you'll, and I know we have a million more questions that we could ask you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for your tips. And we look forward to hearing you and seeing you wherever you are, and then maybe working with you again. That would be incredible.
I would love that. I want to thank you, Rosalie. I want to thank Diana, and I want to thank Emily for putting this thing together. You guys have done an amazing job, made me feel so good. And the questions, by the way, guys, were fantastic. So thank you all for coming to this interview. And you're quite the interviewer, Rosalia. Great job.
Oh, thank you. It's easy with you. That's for sure.
You're so sweet, and it was really wonderful. So thank you, everybody, and look forward to being part of future events with you guys again.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Sandra. Incredible. Okay.